Welcome everyone to the VR guys. Carl here. I love pinball and I love VR, so I decided to build myself a Pinsim controller. A Pinsim controller is essentially the first part of a real pinball table with a USB controller wired up to the buttons and used to play pinball in VR or flat screen on your PC. I started by finding the plans for a real pinball table, then designing the Pinsim in SketchUp first to get an idea of the dimensions that I would need. Mine is made up to be 340mm long, or a little over 13 inches. I made mine to be longer than some of the other designs out there because I needed to fit some extra hardware inside the cabinet. Once I was happy with the design, I started cutting my panels out of 18mm plywood. I don't have access to a lot of fancy tools, so it was done with what I had on hand. If you have access to some basic power tools, you can build one as well. After drilling and adding the cutouts for the coin door and plunger, the cabinet was assembled. I used wood glue to join the panels and nailed the panels in place to hold them while the glue dried. A few clamps as well made sure it stayed together. I realised after assembling the cabinet that I needed to add some extra flipper buttons. So I drilled those and the hole for the cables to come out the back as well. Holes for the legs were also added. The measurements from the plans I found didn't match the legs I had, which I didn't find out about until I tried to test fit the legs. This was easily fixed though, by attaching the legs with the top bolt and using the second hole as my drill guide. I used wood filler putty to fill up nail holes and any imperfections in the plywood before sanding the entire cabinet. I started with 80 grit and worked my way up to 240 grit in the end. Vinyl was then applied to the cabinet, working slowly and going from one end and smoothing it out as I went on each panel. Creases and bubbles can normally be smoothed out by using a heat gun on the vinyl. I ended up messing up the front panel vinyl with a crease that I couldn't remove, so I had to redo that. Work carefully. I also should have painted the cabinet edges before applying the vinyl. Once I trimmed the excess off, I had bare plywood showing through, so I had to tape it off and then paint the wood. Once that was all done, it was time to finally add the buttons, plunger, coin door and legs for a final fit. In the next part, I'll go over the wiring and hardware used and adding a force feedback system so it feels like a real pinball and not just looks it. Sit back, enjoy the build, and I'll see you next time.